Hello and welcome. This is the Excel and Elevate Leadership Podcast. Here at VIA, we're committed to the principle of what it means to be a steward leader and to apply the SERVE principles of leadership. We love to see you excel in your leadership responsibilities and have opportunities to elevate that leadership. With guests from around the globe, this is a place where we have leadership conversations about what matters most.
Welcome to the Excel and Elevate podcast, where we have leadership conversations about the things that matter most. Today, I'm hosting our podcast. For those who don't know me, I'm Carissa. I'm part of our leadership development team here at VIA. And today we are going to be talking about one of our VIA leadership principles that really shape our culture here in our organization. And we're going to be focusing on the element of leadership where we engage and develop our staff. I'm so excited to have with us today John and Amy Allert, who are field team leaders for Euro Russia, and Lawson, who oversees our NWA city team. And so we're so excited to have you guys here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as we jump in Ken Blanchard's book, The Secret, which is kind of where a lot of our leadership principles have come from in our organization, he writes that leaders are good leaders engage and develop their staff. And they do that through connecting with staff as people, seeing them as real people with real lives, enabling them to develop their talents, their capabilities, and to grow through training and educational opportunities that align with their role and where they're at professionally. And so as you guys think about your leadership journey and just where you've been, I know you guys have been in leadership for a long time. How has your understanding of what it means to engage and develop staff changed from when you first started as a leader to now? So John and Amy, let's start with you.
All right. Well, I think we have changed from staff being a means to the end of accomplishing the mission to staff being the end, and really seeking to engage and develop them as maybe our highest priority in ministry. I've had to shift from being on the field to really my job is to care, develop, and engage our staff so that their ministry is thriving, that they are personally thriving. And so I kind of took this engage is more of, do our staff feel engaged? You know, are they thriving in their ministry, in their walk with God, in community? Those are kind of three really big areas for us that we are very intentional about. And so I think our flywheel model has been really helpful. I refer to it and use it weekly to just kind of go, hey, what area this week, is maybe not so good, in those 7 F's. But when it comes to engaging, I think of fellowship and how their community is. I think of fun being more like rest and kind of restoring and refreshing. And I think of fit. Are they constantly operating out of exhaustion and not a good fit, and their weaknesses versus their strengths? But yeah, I'd say our staff feel like they are thriving and doing well on the field when they're walking closely with God, when they're in good community, and when they're thriving in ministry as well. So what that looks like, I guess, for our team, it comes out in like our PDP, personal development plan. So we have those 3 areas are like musts. I want to see how you want to grow in your walk with God. I want to see how you're growing in community, mostly outside the team, so they have healthy community outside the team. And how are you growing in your craft, in your profession, in your ministry, and getting better, as a mobilizer. So as far as those 3 areas, I think fellowship, that's what it looks like. Fun, I think it looks more like celebrating. We do lots of celebrating on our team. from birthdays to end of semester to end of year to, even little stuff on our little chat group. When something goes well, we all celebrate together. Half days with the Lord, we really make them take those, as much as we can make them take those. And then, we have retreats throughout the year where we kind of have a mix of fun and, work, we'll say. And in our weekly meetings, we probably have a little health check of just how you doing this week. If there's an issue with one person, we really engage with them, pray for them. And in my coaching times with staff, I always kind of do a little check-in as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a really robust, well-rounded, like you're not relying on just one thing or two things. You're looking at it multifaceted, multi-angles. Amy, is there anything you would add to that of what's changed for you in your journey?
Yeah, I totally agree with John that I think it's moved from more of a seeing them as maybe means to an end and to more of a stewardship model that really we only have them for a short period of time. And hopefully we are just like a little greenhouse that they get to be a part of while they're developing into leaders as they're, on their own. And so if we see our role as stewards of them, that does lend itself more to a holistic view of how are they doing in every area of their life. But I do think it's also shifted to even more of a strong emphasis on the foundation that they have with the Lord and making sure that that's the beginning of where their health really lies and helping them live with that out with integrity. I think, especially on the field, there can be a sense of, if I do all of these things, I'm checking all these boxes, I can kind of skate by with a veneer of godliness. We kind of get especially as field workers working cross-culturally, we can get a bit of a bump from the church, or, people go in with these assumptions that we're godly people or that we're somehow varsity level Christians, which isn't the case. And often we see people really struggle. Yeah. And we really see people struggle with that kind of mask of a veneer of godliness that actually eats away at them over time. And so as leaders, if we can help them live lives of integrity and see them as these holistic, whole people that want to make sure that every area of their life is being lived in conformity with the values that they say they profess and that we as an organization want for them. We want them to be healthy, whole in every area. So that does look like we kind of address every single facet of their lives, because we want to set them up for thriving, not only in ministry and on the field, but for life with the Lord and building his kingdom long-term, regardless of what that role will be, but for a lifetime.
Yeah. I feel like, it's true for every believer everywhere, but especially in ministry, like a huge part of your engagement, like enjoying your work and doing work well, it has to start from that root of a healthy spiritual walk. And so that's really important. Lawson, what about you in your leadership journey? What has really shifted in your thinking in terms of engagement and development?
Yeah, I think for me, I saw it for a while, really trying to find a really good curriculum, specifically in the development realm. I really wanted almost this foolproof plan that I could really just kind of hand to people. And if they went through it at the end, they would be, a pretty good leader. And that obviously is simply a non-existent prospect, a non-existent idea. So coming to realize that we are leaders who are trying to grow and develop leaders. And I think that changed quite a bit for me is realizing if I continue to try and create this curriculum, I will become the ceiling as opposed to the floor for all of my staff. I will only be able to really let them develop up to my level. And that is obviously the opposite we want. And so it's become more and more clear that the more I can hand people scenarios and primarily teach them just how to learn from failure. I think that has become a much more important and a much more effective, really journey pathway for people to develop into leaders in their own right. Is when I say, let me take this idea, this concept, and I'm handing it to you, and you have full ownership over this thing. And, you kind of say, this is your decision to make. And, try to make it so that about 75% of the questions they ask in return, well, hey, what should I do in this? What do you want from this? I'll kind of turn back on them in a sense and say, well, I don't know, what do you think? And I can't think of a single instance in which a staff was genuinely, 9 times out of 10, let me put it that way, a staff would reply with something to yeah, here's what I was thinking. And whatever they were thinking was so much better than what I was thinking. Like what I would have responded with if I answered directly versus, man, they have full ownership. And I turn the question back onto them when they kind of ask for help. Not that I'm not helping, but I'm just showing them it's in there. You do have it in you. And a lot of times, yeah, it's revealing that. And then when things don't go to plan, I hesitate to use the word failure because if they tried something, I don't consider failure an option in that regard. And so when things don't go the way they thought they would, then we talk through, why didn't that go the way you thought you would? Did it actually turn out better in a sense? And how do we recognize and identify the specifics of, we'll tweak this next time, not a big deal. But then also, yeah, it's just saying this actually turned out maybe different from what you thought, but there's some ways it's actually better. And how can we really practice a heart of gratitude to Jesus for what he did? And even when things, maybe you get less people at a group or whatever, it's not failure. We practice that heart of gratitude to say, man, I actually got to spend more time in a deep conversation with 1 or 2 people versus trying to maintain this large group. Just as one example of what many would consider failure is actually it's a win. It's an opportunity because of what Jesus is actually trying to do there. So handing off scenarios entirely. And I think that's been really helpful for my staff as they've grown into their own. It also requires less micromanagement for me in the long run. A lot of work on the front end. I got to organize all that. I got to put those scenarios together. I got to define those things. So there's a lot of work for me on the front end, and I don't get to be out leading the Explore studies, doing a lot of stuff maybe I joined staff for. But it gives me life to see when these guys really start taking ownership entirely and growing in their own right.
So Lawson, tell me, what theories or principles, kind of skills, have really had the greatest impact on you as a leader in terms of your engagement and development of staff?
Yeah, John and Amy touched on it earlier, but this I get from Scott Roden, Steward Leadership book. And it's now the book that I have. If anyone desires to step into leadership, that's the book I kind of start them on. I just love the way Scott Roden reframes, and his kind of bottom line is people are the ends, not the means. So that was one significant mind shift for me, is recognizing, as John and Amy said, these people that I'm leading on this team, they are the ends. And what's made it then how I operate my life has kind of had to change. And specifically in the realm of, I would say, emotional intelligence. We did some ministry kind of on our own for a couple years here in Fayetteville before the team joined us, and it was fun, but I really was able to operate kind of as I saw fit. And you find this out when you get married, when you have kids, when you start bringing people into that space, things start to bump against each other, and you kind of things start to agitate you a little bit. And what became so important for me was to learn some of the skills of what we, would call emotional intelligence, and being able to kind of identify, when something hits me the wrong way. And I know it bothered me.
I know I hesitate to use the word triggered, but kind of to use that phrase, I know that if somebody implies, this thing, if even they seem adjacent to implying this thing, it's gonna bother me. And so I've had to utilize a lot of, again, what we call emotional intelligence skills and tools in order to be able to just name and identify, like, oh, I kind of have this issue. And again, emotional intelligence, give that quick definition. I just say that it's joining God in reality. We're made in his image. That includes emotions. That includes the mental health side of things. A lot of buzzwords there now that a lot of people get skeptical when you kind of use the wrong words. But in reality, it's all a reflection of our following God. And to me, learning how to recognize what's going on, sin patterns in my own life, that's emotional intelligence. And then also recognizing what it's given me the ability to do is start to recognize patterns in the lives of other people. And so that principle there of emotional intelligence, I apply to myself, but I also apply quite a bit to my team. And we see Jesus do it all the time. This is kind of where I became so excited about it, is rereading the Gospels. And Jesus, was an emotional genius. And really specifically in the regard that the problem was never the problem. And Jesus was always able to kind of see through that and kind of reframe the problem. And he addressed directly the hearts of the people. The Pharisees didn't have the problem that they didn't know the scriptures, that they weren't well versed or well trained. Their problem was their hearts were hardened. And their problem was they were power hungry. And, we call them today, we call them narcissists. And so Jesus always had, that idea in his mind that there's more going on. There's generational sin. These people have had, they've been affected by sin from others. Their own sin affects them, and they simply don't want freedom from that sin. They want power. So to me, being able to work through my own problems and then help other people do that as well has really allowed me, whenever a problem comes up, we can reframe it. It's like the optical illusion. When it looks like someone's standing next to a large boulder, and then they start walking toward the camera, and suddenly that huge boulder, they're holding it in the palm of their hand, and they're like, the whole time, it's actually this small thing if you reframe it. So that's what emotional intelligence really does. And then I'm able to hand things off to people when they have a good grasp on kind of who they are, what works for them, what doesn't. Then I'm able to delegate, going back to that first point, a whole lot more to them. And that's actually really fun, is when you see people kind of thriving because they're able to say, oh, I know I can go about this work. I can get this thing done. I'm confident in it. And a lot of that confidence comes from just them knowing and being able to name something that will bother them, something that will, hey, I'm going to step into this challenge. And I know X, Y, and Z factors in this scenario are going to bother me, but that's okay. Naming something shrinks it, and it allows people to deal with that appropriately. So,
I think that's so important.
Skills.
Yeah, because I think, when it comes to development, if you're trying to teach somebody a skill set for their job, you could try and teach it 10 different ways. But if the root of them struggling to learn that is internal because of something they've been through in their past or their own insecurities, anxiety, fear, like, you can send them to as many trainings and read as many books, and they're not going to develop because you got to deal with the whole person there. And so I love how you're bringing emotional intelligence into that development and engagement space, not just for your staff, but also for you, and so much of employee engagement is having a healthy boss who's not like leaking their stuff all over the team, right? And so that's so important. John and Amy, as you think about the skill sets, like, what are the skill sets of a leader? What have been the most helpful skill sets for you in engaging and developing your staff?
Do you want to take a shot at this?
Oh, I definitely agree with what Lawson was just saying. Fundamentally, I think John has a lot more practical things that he could add, but just things that have been helpful to him. But I do think that self-awareness and knowing both our giftedness and our brokenness that we bring to the equation, and being very honest and transparent about that with our team, and saying, I'm really, I've seen John grow in this in incredible ways over the last, probably decade, of him being able to go, I'm really bad at reading your emotions. So if you could be very direct with me about how you're feeling, that really helps me out.
I need an emotional 2x4, please.
He's like, you won't offend me, so he works really hard at making sure they feel safe so they can come to him and be honest about how they're feeling. But him actually being very self-aware and going, I'm not great at this. I'm great at some other things, but I'm not great at this. What that does is it just creates this culture of it's okay to be human. It's okay that I'm following an imperfect leader, because really we're all following the perfect leader together, and that we look to Jesus as our standard, not to John and Amy, not to Lawson, not to Carissa, but we're looking to Jesus as our standard. And if we do that well as leaders, then that actually empowers and encourages our staff to find their own, sense of, I can lead, that, like we're not an impossible standard, because we're obviously fallen and broken, and we're honest and transparent about all of that. Even the things that they may not see, we can share our internal struggles and things that we can hide very easily from them. But if we create a culture of vulnerability, point people to Jesus, then they actually end up feeling empowered to become the next generation of leaders, moving forward with courage and faith in their own imperfections, not having to hold to an impossible standard that nobody could fulfill.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of modeling is happening in that scenario too. Yeah. John, talk to me about, we had talked earlier before this podcast, you've talked about being a student of your team, that skill set of learning your team. Talk to me more about that and how you apply that in your leadership.
That's been huge. As we've said, both in strengths and weaknesses, knowing my strengths, my weaknesses, their strengths, their weaknesses. So we have spent a good amount of time doing MBTI and Enneagram and Myers, and Working Genius was the other one. Not so much that for people to meet my needs, I know what I need, but that I can meet other people's needs. So we use it to be other-centered, not to be more self-centered. These are my needs and you're not meeting them kind of attitude. And so I would say learning those things, discussing those things, and processing scenarios as a team. Chris and Jamie have been really great at helping us walk through some scenarios. I can see, wow, I would not handle it that way at all. But I can see how this is just as valid and has maybe better than what I was going to come up with. And so putting ourselves in that situation, working on those skills, not just talking about the concepts, because I think the concepts fade after a week or two, but trying to put them in practice in team meetings. And how do we give somebody the microphone, who has the floor, instead of all talking at once? And, little things that we've just picked up along the ways, and realizing, especially in mobilization, that you have kind of your initiators, and then you have the people that want to do the hands-on, real discipleship part of mobilization. And even realizing, okay, these people don't mind going out there to conferences and, meeting with pastors and doing all of that, networking and all that stuff. Other people, that's totally a drain on them. That is not their working genius. And so even kind of contextualizing a bit of our team and our roles in that, I think over time we just get better and better and better, because we're constantly observing, ooh, that didn't go well, evaluating at the end of the semester. I just did a mid-year eval. I've never done one before. And I'm just like, I want some real honest feedback. Are you really thriving in your role? Is it overwhelming? Are we shooting too high? Do you have regular anxiety? And, and getting honest feedback, and then going, we can change. We can focus your role a little bit better, narrow it down. We can move you to areas where you're not constantly operating out of, a weak area or something that's very draining for you. If 90% of your job is very draining for you, it's just a matter of time before you can't do it anymore, So yeah, we just did that just last week for our kind of mid-year check-in, and it was really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Amy, you mentioned earlier the greenhouse idea, right? And I think about plants. Plants don't all grow and thrive in the same conditions, right? Some need more sun, some need shade, some need a lot more water. And so I think, it's the same with parenting, right? Like you can't parent all your kids the same way. And so I just think that's so important, seeing our staff. I love that you're focusing on where are you strong, and then how do we maximize those strengths, rather than trying to constantly put you in places where you're weak, which then are going to drive down engagement. Right. Because you don't feel joy. You don't feel good in your work because you're trying to do something you're not good at. And so I love that, we want to make sure our staff are in the right seat on the bus. Like they're in a role where they're going to thrive, on a team that they're going to thrive. But then there's space to move that around and bring out the things that are unique about them. I love that. Lawson, what do you feel like is, tell me about maybe a mistake or failure, we use that word in a positive way, that you went through, and that experience really, you learned a lot from it, it really shaped you as a leader in this area.
Yeah. Very difficult to pick one, obviously. Most grateful for the mistakes, because of course that is what makes us all better leaders when we view them through the lens of the Holy Spirit. So I think one of the biggest ones, and this goes a little bit back to the emotional intelligence idea we were talking about earlier, and that was developing the skills, then developing the schedule to actually utilize those skills in order to work through kind of my own junk. Because what I noticed happen far too often was that I would be, maybe it's a team meeting, a team planning meeting, or a discipleship meeting, or a staff coaching meeting. And when I left the meeting, I immediately knew, gosh, that person's probably not walking away all that, encouraged, all that equipped. Now that I think about it, I don't think I really addressed their problem. I either tried to fix their problem, but again, I did nothing for one, to help them to see through their problem and reframe it, make the boulder recognized as a little rock, and then recognizing how much I brought my junk into those meetings. And really, I too often was, I'll say blinded, but it's not even blinded. I was too often guided by the stuff I was bringing in and different hangups that I had personally had. Say, a certain relationship or a certain relationship dynamic with people in power, with a pastor. It gives me anxiety, or it just makes me uncomfortable, or, I tend to kind of flex and almost bow up. And sometimes I wished I would actually have physically bowed up so that I could be more aware that I was doing it. But I would guide those conversations then, and I would try and develop staff based on what I personally needed. And I would really try and help them, but out of a place of insecurity, like I said, anxiety or fear or frustration, anger, bitterness, you name the sin. And I just realized I was operating a lot of meetings really out of my own sin patterns and sin problems and struggles. So when I kind of took that time, again, this is a lot of work. I had to plan time in my schedule. Hopefully seeing a therapist at times, but when I don't have that available for whatever reason, then I have to kind of have time in my schedule where I work through sort of self-reflection questions. I always do it with the Lord. never try and do it alone. And then, of course, I'll be able to talk to my spouse, but to whom it may concern, your closest person, whomever that may be. And just being able to talk out like that, whatever that was really, really bothered me. And I need to know why. I need to know why when that person said that drove me nuts internally. And praise God, I was able to, not allow that to explode. But that's probably my biggest mistake. And I would even say failure. And the failure is simply when I allow it to go too long. That's probably when I get into the realm of, okay, we moved from little mistake to failure is when I continue to neglect that and continue to operate kind of knowing I'm not in a good place for whatever reason. And that doesn't mean I just sideline myself. It means that I actually need to press in to the Lord and to close community and to have conversations that help dig that stuff up and allow me space to just identify, man, that thing bothered me. I think it's because of this. I think, and you can trace that however far you want. Sometimes it does go down to childhood, or sometimes it, goes back to a point in your past. That just is bringing that back up. And that's, again, that generational sin. It's all a factor in there. And it's all throughout Scripture, this emotional intelligence idea. We just, they use different words, obviously, in ancient Hebrew culture. So that's probably my biggest one is I got to dig that up so I don't affect the culture of the team and the direction of individuals and the direction of the team because I'm insecure mess.
Yeah, that self-awareness is so important. I think sometimes we try to detach because engagement development feels like I'm doing this for you, but we bring ourselves into that. And I know in my own leadership journey, realizing one of my blind spots was when I'm worn out, I wear other people out. When I'm worn out, I don't withdraw. I actually rev up and I get this frantic, nervous energy. And then that wears my team out because they're trying to run pace with me. And they're like, whoa, what's happening? And it's because I'm not dealing with my own heart. And that deeply impacts engagement and development in our team. So I think as we kind of wrap up our time together, the things I'm hearing from your guys' experience is really the secret to success and healthy engagement and development of our staff is it's starting, with yourself, right? That authentic, real walk with Jesus and dealing with your stuff, being aware of your blind spots and growing and working through your own, what you bring to the table and seeing your staff as individuals, not cookie cutters, not looking for programs in a box, and seeing engagement and development as a core part of your job. That this is not something extra on the side and the real work is mobilization. When you move into that team leader role, this is your job, is to engage your staff, to help them feel like they're thriving in their roles and that they have the skills that they need to do the work that we've asked them to do. And so, I love all the thoughts that you're sharing. Thanks for just being vulnerable, for just sharing what you've learned and the mistakes you made. I think that's the culture we want here at VIA, is that we're willing, like you just said, Amy, to not hide our stuff and to be able to say, man, we're working through this as a team, or here's where we're seeing success, or here's where I made a mistake. And then from that, we collectively are growing together. It's that ironing, sharpening iron. And so that's the heart of this podcast. We want to have leadership conversations about the things that matter most. So we're all growing in the principles of steward leadership and the serve principles from The Secret. And all of that really points to that VIA value of staff first, of really making sure that our staff are healthy and feel loved and seen as people, not just products. And doers. And so thank you for being here and giving your time. And I look forward to our next Excel and Elevate podcast, where we will have more leadership conversations about things that matter most.